Hey, Rich, how are you?
How's it going, man?
It's been an emotionally raw stretch, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't want people to think wrongly of me when I say I go to bed with you often. So I promise not to say that publicly, although this is being recorded now, so that could be held against me.
Yeah.
But I just finished your talk with a guy I've loved, even though back then he was a think tank on the other side of the aisle. But I've always loved Arthur Brooks. He's just such a great guy. Yeah, that was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm touched and honored that you make the time to listen to the show. I can't believe that's possible, but Arthur makes my job easy. He's such a beautiful font of wisdom, and it is interesting as him being somebody who was head of a conservative think tank. My sense is that he really doesn't want to talk about politics. That's not his interest level right now.
I mean, you covered it well, which, all of us being in our 50s, he definitely has made a shift away from this crazy think tank world. But he was moving that way. He wrote this amazing book about love, which I think was one before this one, that I my stack of books right now is just trying to figure out how do we talk to each other in a country that's spiraling in kind of into a culture of contempt. And he's been really thoughtful about that, and I think highly influenced by the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, and I think that's a good place to just jump right into it. I mean, I know your time is tight, and I really appreciate you carving out.
The staff, they said 15 minutes. I've been looking to talk to Rich Roll for since I started listening to his podcast. I fell in love with your podcast. It was one of your best of years. Like at the end of the year, you sample from all the ones, and
right.
So I've been looking to have a conversation with you for a very long time. So I told my staff to give me at least an extra 15 minutes because I knew I was going to fanboy all over you for the first 15, and we wouldn't get to the subject matter.
Well, you got me all buttered up, and I'm going to hold you to that because I'm definitely, somebody who wants to get you in the studio, and we'll do the full kit and caboodle podcast at some point when your schedule permits.
Your journey. I read Finding Ultra, and I think that you can see, in my opinion, the universe sort of using you. I think that not only athletics, but also your struggles with addiction have made your power of empathy and your ability to connect. I always say that broken people, we're all broken more than we maybe want to admit. But you not only does it let good stuff in, but it also creates more points of contact, which you can connect with other broken people. And I think that you have this wonderful ability to connect with the people you interview that in a real way, in a substantive way, to go a little deeper than some of the general interviews we often see. I think that's a gift.
I appreciate that. It's an honor to be able to do it, and it's certainly nourishing for me. And to be able to kind of give it back to the audience is just something that just gives my life purpose and meaning. So I'm very grateful to be on this journey and to be talking to you today, my friend.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Obviously, the country is under a lot of strain right now. We're enduring some challenges, not the least of which is all of the mass shootings, what transpired in Uvalde and subsequent incidents that we've all borne witness to, these tragic events. And so I really wanted to kind of focus the limited time that we have with you today on the subject of gun violence and gun control. And I thought it might be beneficial to just hear your perspective. Like, what is your bird's eye view on kind of where we're at as a nation? How are you thinking about this issue right now? And perhaps like some thoughts on why this is so intractable in terms of finding solutions.
So I'm a kid that grew up in the suburbs and of New Jersey, and not part of a hunting culture. My granddad did take me out once, but it's a suburban town outside of New York, and gun violence didn't affect my life. But I've lived the last since the late 90s in Newark, New Jersey, in the Central Ward, and gun violence immediately impacted my life. On my first nights sleeping in an apartment I got across the street from the projects, I eventually moved into them. I started hearing gunshots at night. I still remember coming out one day and there being a sort of the tail end of a shooting. And since then, I've lost young kids I've known. to gun violence and seeing the horrific everyday realities of gun violence in America. And it's often the violence we don't talk about. It's stunning to me how we as a nation doesn't even pop into our consciousness unless we have these horrific mass shootings. But every single day, on average, more than 300 Americans are shot, over 100 Americans die. And the violence is everything from domestic violence, which we don't talk about, to suicides, which we don't talk about enough. And now we have this stunning rise of hate in our country, where since 9/11, we've lost more Americans due to Americans killing Americans, right-wing groups, from synagogues to churches to supermarkets, and then obviously school shootings like we just had. So this is a very personal issue for me. I'm some of my own personal trauma being in and around shootings, and so I came here as the only United States senator that lives in a low-income Black and brown neighborhood who's had shootings on their block. And most recently, in 2018, a young man, Shahad, who I used to live in the same building with, the police officer who was giving me the account said it was like his head blew up. It was an assault rifle that he got hit with. And so it's been frustrating to me that to live in a country where, in the time that you and I have been alive as guys in their 50s, we've had more people die to gun violence than in every single war in America combined.
Yeah.
And so when you start asking me why something hasn't changed, I think it's too easy and convenient to say it's just Washington, because we've seen change happen against impossible odds before. When 4 little girls died in the bombing in Birmingham, you saw a nation mobilize to demand change. And as I remind people all the time about this place, there's an old trope saying here that they say often that change doesn't come from Washington, it comes to Washington. It wasn't a bunch of guys on the Senate floor in the 1920s that said, "Hey, fellas, let's give these women a right to vote." It happened because people demanded it. As Frederick Douglass says, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Mm-hmm. And so we have tolerated for a very long time in this country a level of carnage and violence and death that we've almost normalized, because days and days go by without us doing enough. And so I can give you stuff that and I've listened to you enough of your podcast, and I've heard you express understandable skepticism, if not cynicism, about Washington and politics. There are very powerful lobbies. There's money. There's people's ambition. There is a real consequence to Congress people running in red districts, where districts have been drawn where they're always worried about being primaried by somebody on their right. I was on Meet the Press recently with a guy who just lost a Senate race, who lowered violence in his North Carolina city 50%, but he was running against somebody that had a gun in their belt, he said, for most of their commercials, and he lost in a primary because the guy casted him soft on guns. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a convenient and easy excuse just to blame it on Washington. It's almost like surrendering responsibility and not understanding that we all have a role to change this nightmare. And it's more than just those real things that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I think, that makes me, want to know more about, and my colleague Adam Skolnick is on the line too, and I know he wants to chime in on this, the kind of lived experience of you being a legislator, a senator, and what that experience is like that perhaps we're not aware of. Like, if there is, to the extent that there's frustration, like, why can't we just get a law passed, or what is actually going on? Like, when you, as somebody who cares deeply about this issue and is working so diligently to change the law and move our country forward in a new direction on this subject matter, like, what are the obstacles that you encounter on a daily basis, or what do we as the public, not see about what that is like for you?
So, look, I've seen the best of this place and I've seen the worst of it, where we've been able to hammer out really great bills. Our criminal justice system is an outrage. We're a nation that takes our addicted, our mentally ill, our poor, our Black and brown. We stick them in jails when they often need help or health care or counseling or trauma treatment. And we put them in our jails. And, we've passed some good bills to try to start changing this nation from being the country where we still are, with 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth are in the United States. And so we've passed some bills that have liberated thousands of people. That's the best of us. We have a long way to go, though. And I've seen the worst of us. We just passed an anti-lynching bill more than a century after it was first introduced, when thousands of Blacks were being killed, and we couldn't even make lynching a federal crime until 2022. And so I've seen the corporate gun lobby and how powerful they are. I've seen them change. I think after Columbine, Wayne LaPierre said, we need to make universal background checks. He was for a lot of things, but the culture has slipped on the sort of within the NRA world, where they are resisting and fighting any change whatsoever. And they are a very powerful lobby for people who are concerned about re-election. And so, like, right now, I've watched now, I've been here 8-9 years, and I have seen those Americans who are really willing to do something different, dig in, organize, show more pressure on politics, change laws on states. Since Parkland, there's been a whole lot of state laws that have changed for the better. But here, it's been more difficult. I think we're actually going to get something done. I was talking with Senator Murphy and a group of House members that there's hope here that something can get done. But I'm going to be candid; it's going to be very incremental, necessary things, but nowhere near sufficient to end the kind of carnage what we're seeing on a regular basis.
Yeah. Senator Booker, you're talking about the election cycle and the pressure to get reelected. How, when we see these stats of the NRA and how much they're contributing to people like Mitt Romney or, Mitch McConnell, people who you could argue are bigger than the NRA in some ways. They have their own kind of brand, but they're still under the sway of an organization like that. Does that speak to how hard it is to raise money and compete in politics? Like, what is the draw there? Or like, is it more that they're afraid of the primary? Like, what do you think is the draw for some of these bigger names that you think you would be able to win without them?
So again, you're getting into the psychology of your colleagues is often a dangerous odyssey. You can lose your own mind trying to figure out people's different motivations. The NRA is not the biggest donor down here, and money. I mean, it's really one of the toxins of our government. I think when Citizens United passed and corporations now can pour tons and tons of money, it strengthens the corporate gun lobby. Because remember, these are corporations who are having a field day. They're selling guns in our country, at a level that we could have never imagined. Every man, woman, and child in America, from babies to 99-year-olds, could have one gun, and then we'd still have 70 million more guns out in our streets. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it's just the money they're contributing. And again, like, for example, I gave up all corporate money. I was the fourth senator to do so. I just didn't want to give anybody reason to question my motives. But I know that as you said, there are people that can raise money if they didn't get the $30,000 from the corporate gun lobby. But I think their power, a lot of it lies in their ability to mobilize people and get them out to vote singularly on this issue. And that's pretty powerful. If you're in a election where if you don't have that A rating and you're going to be beat up by it by somebody else who really has whipped up this idea that this person is going to be a part of the group in Washington that's going to try to take away your guns. When gun sales spike when Democrats get elected, because they have, again, and you could listen to the rhetoric, because people are told that you're going to lose people who believe, the very narrow version, believe that they're going to lose your gun rights. So that's a base, not in my world, but that's a base, I think, for that people are concerned about in primaries.
Yeah, what's interesting is that that being said, it does seem like the NRA is out of step with its constituency because the polling demonstrates clearly that most people are in favor of rational gun control, and yet the NRA still wields so much power to, rebut the public sentiment on this issue. And so I guess I'm curious about, you mentioned Senator Murphy, Chris Murphy from Connecticut. He's put together this bipartisan consortium of legislators to really work on rational gun control. Like, are you sanguine about the possibilities here? Because that does seem like something that's new and different from what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I just want to dwell on that point you made first, which is such an important point, and I should have mentioned it already. This is not a partisan issue. It really is not. And the problem often with our country is we try to reduce things into the binary world as Dem or Republican. When I've listened to your show enough to know that you realize that's not the case. I mean, the stranglehold that Big Ag has down here is not a partisan issue. Mm-hmm. Chemicals that are being sprayed on our foods that are in our bloodstream, breast milk and the like, it's not a partisan issue. Tech issues are not partisan issues. And we as Americans have so much more in common. The lines that divide us are nowhere near as strong as the ties that bind us. But this political industrial complex that will try to parse us along these tribes, I think and make us believe that we're different. That's a problem. There's a whole raft of common sense gun safety things that I've seen comedians go to NRA conventions and ask people about universal background checks. And you just see these NRA members saying all this about, I'm worried about my guns being taken. But universal background checks, heck yeah, we need to have them to stop criminals from getting guns. So this is not a partisan issue amongst Americans. It's a partisan issue down here. And that's a lot of the disconnect. Folks have got to, on the Republican side, Democratic side, whatever you identify, begin to make this a central issue in your political behavior. Mm-hmm. And as far as me being optimistic, I'm a prisoner of hope, but I always differentiate hope from optimism. Hope stares the wretched truth of the world in the face, doesn't deny it, but still believes ultimately that something can be done. And so I've seen this come around, and I can't, if I lost hope that we could do something, I don't think I could continue doing this job. I will tell you again that Washington watchers do think that there are the makings right now because of, Chris Murphy said this to me today, said this to a group of us today, that his sense was that a lot of folks went home and heard from people within that identify as their tribe, the Republicans, and we're so dismayed about this because at the end of the day, we are all hugging our children if you have them before they go to school. There's a lot of that worry I think that they're feeling, which is opening the door to do a little bit. But I do not have a belief that in this bill, we're going to see the kind of comprehensive things that most Americans, Republican, Democrat, Independent, would want to see.
But we got to start, just like Trevor Noah's monologue the other day. Like, we have to start somewhere, and we got to iterate on that. And just to get anything. And
I'm sorry, I love history. Yeah. People look at the civil rights movement and think it was in the 60s. People started in the A. Philip Randolph and others were working on a March on Washington far before the one we know about in the 60s. They were doing activism and protests and working and making small changes. Thurgood Marshall was out there changing laws and more. So I agree with you. This, first of all, we have started the Parkland Kids, the Moms Demand Action, Gabby Giffords organization. There's a chapter in every single state of Moms Demand Action, for example, that are making a difference in local elections, city, county, state elections. So this is a movement. The question is are you a part of it or not? Because I think what Martin Luther King said at very frustrating points in the civil rights movement, remember his letters from the Birmingham jail were not to the racists. He was talking to good people. And what he said is what we have to repent in this day and age. And these words echo in this moment. What we have to repent for is not simply the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And so that's the question. To me, it's very binary. I don't know. Don't tell me what your beliefs are. Show me who you are through your actions. Are you part of the movement to change these laws? Are you doing more than you did before Uvalde? Are you doing more than you did before Buffalo? Or are you doing the same things you were doing before those two mass shootings and expecting other people to make the change that you want to see in your country?
Yeah.
You spoke about this kind of increased contempt in terms of the volume. I guess that's speaking to polarization, but also speaking to kind of, I guess, information silos and how that can turn up the volume and the heat on some issues like this one. It seems like a tragedy like this, the breaking of all of us, like if the United States is our common body and we're broken, it seems like that should be the place to latch on and to do some good, right? I mean, that's what we were talking about, but maybe before we started to record this interview, how a time of brokenness can be the perfect time to come together. Are you seeing anything like that? I know that you're kind of trying to make us not expect too much from this coming law, but are you seeing any of that? Are you hearing any of that in the hallways? A little bit more coming together at all?
So I do think that they're hurt and shattered more than broken. How much a lot of us have been is creating a climate for change, and the rhythms of Washington D.C. are often in those moments where we share a common pain. Sometimes we can find common purpose. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I think we're going to get something incremental done, or at least I'm hoping and praying that we will. But I have to be candid with you. We had a hearing today all about replacement theory. And for those who don't know what that is, it's been around for generations. It was around about the Catholics and the Southern Europeans that were coming here to replace Protestant Americans. It's this idea that there is a quote unquote true American. I'm a Black guy who Skip Gates traced my history back to the 1640s, but in this country. But there's this idea that and you hear it. You remember the marching with tiki torches in Virginia. Jews will not replace us. So the hearing, the professors that were there and the experts that were there at this hearing, it was stunning to hear and to look at the data about the mainstreaming of these views. He really called it just like this resurgence of the Klan in the 1920s, which then it was a lot of Catholics hate and the like, and how we're at a perilous moment for our democracy, where you're seeing larger and larger portions view an us versus them within this country, and not just us, where we're all one people with one destiny. And so I don't want to candy coat the truth of our country right now. There is a rise in hate. There is a rise in resentment. There is a culture of contempt. There are these devices that are in our lives now that have algorithms that are profiting off of making us more emotional and more involved. I tell the story even about, I'm pointing to my TV, where a friend of mine had a show on CNN. His name's Van Jones, called Crossfire. And I love what Brene Brown says. She says, it's hard to hate up close, so pull people in. And they decided, when him and Newt Gingrich realized they were proximate to each other and had lots in common, they wanted to do the last segment as ceasefire. And then after a few episodes of that, the producers stopped them because they said ratings were going down. So we have got people who are realizing the incentive, their corporate incentive, their political incentive. As I said in the hearing, if I yelled at Donald Trump during the State of the Union address, if I heckled him and screamed, "You lie, you liar," I may have had a really great fundraising quarter the next quarter. I know that because when somebody yelled that to Barack Obama, they had an incredibly great fundraising quarter. And so we're building this powder keg right now, where we've literally seen people whipped up to storm the Capitol of the United States. And remember, they had symbols of anti-Semitism and racism there, where people are being preyed upon, their vulnerabilities, their hurt, their trauma, their fears are being preyed upon by leaders. And that's my biggest worry for my country right now, for our country. I really worry that if we can't figure this out, if our tribalism becomes deeper and it's no longer an objective analysis, hey, this person believes in these ideas and this ideas, but it's more a tribalism. We demonize each other. We so hate each other that we can't even talk to each other. I worry about the future of our country. We have got to figure out a way. And is this tied to the violence that we are seeing? Absolutely, it is. And so I just will finish this point by saying to you that I'm not despondent, because I believe in the radical redemptive power of love. And I've seen the data, the scientific data, that love goes viral too. In fact, if you're, as a Stanford researchers, Rich, our alma mater, that have shown that just witnessing a kind act changes your biochemistry and makes you more likely to make change. And you can follow it 2 or 3 degrees of separation. But we are going to need a lot more committed Americans to, despite your whipped up differences with somebody, that you can still find ways to create connection and see common dignity and see common destiny. And when you ask me about how things get done down here, how they really get done, one of the best examples of getting through the crap and the obstacles is a story of my implicating myself on my own bias. We all have implicit biases. And there's a guy who's retiring named Inhofe, an Oklahoma senator who, we vilify on our side. Sometimes he carried a snowball down to the Senate floor to show that there was no climate change. But when I got down here, my mentor, a guy named Bill Bradley, told me, go to dinner with your colleagues, find ways to have one-on-ones with them. And I went to Bible study in Inhofe's office, and I'll never forget walking in, and I saw on his shelf a picture of him, and this challenged my implicit bias because I never thought I'd see this kind of picture. I saw a picture of him and a little black girl. And I said, sir, who's that? And he says, it's my daughter. And he tells me this powerful story about him adopting her under tough circumstances. Fast forward many months later, there's a big education bill going through. And I want to get an amendment on this bill about homeless and foster kids. And I'm told there's no amendments being allowed. Lamar Alexander was blocking the bill. But I remembered this point of human connection. And I went to Inhofe, summoning the spirit of his daughter and the connection I felt with his humanity that we often don't see when we're on different sides of the political aisle. And I'll never forget, he told me, I will co-sponsor your amendment on a bill that no amendments were being allowed. I had this powerful chairman. Then I got Chuck Grassley. Then we got other Republicans, and it's now the law of the land. And that's just one small story. But I think we need millions of those stories in all of our lives to begin to start to heal the fabric and break through the bias and the venom and all those who profit off of our hate or our contempt for each other.
Very powerfully put, and beautifully stated. I mean, thank you for that. I mean, certainly love, connection, these are the antidotes to the rift that is increasingly dividing us. And the misalignment of incentives, whether technological or economic, that are driving this. I mean, we're close enough in age, Senator, that we remember a time when a crisis befell our country. It brought us together. It didn't drive us apart into our silos and make us argue with each other. And it really is an existential crisis. And if we can't see our way forward from that, none of the other issues are ever going to get addressed. So I appreciate you pointing that out. And I know your time is running out with us, but it was amazing to have a few minutes to talk to you. And I appreciate you sharing with us and our audience. And I really do hope that at some point in the not too distant future, I can sit down with you in person and do a full-blown podcast.
Hey, Rich, can I make one more
sure.
Perhaps emotional plea to your audience? Is I love your podcast. I love listening to the two of you go at it during the new kind of evolution of your podcast, where you have this you two interstitially. And I just trust and believe that not only is your podcast strong, but it appeals to people across the political spectrum and from all different backgrounds. And the appeal I want to make to you is that I was doing a New York Times editorial, and they asked me, they were doing fun questions at the end. They were interviewing all the Democratic presidential candidates. And they would ask me funny questions, and they asked me a question: "What was the biggest mistake you've ever made?" And I thought they thought they were going to get a light answer. And I said, "Look, the biggest mistake I made was when I was living in these high-rise projects in the lobby of the building. I lived there for 8 years, this place called Brick Towers. And I watched these little amazing boys grow up, all black boys. The leader of the crew was my dad incarnate, and they were so similar. They were both whip smart, charismatic, born leaders, both born at or below the poverty line, both weren't raised by their mothers, raised by their grandmothers. There were just so many similarities. It was eerie to me. One day I came home smelling something I hadn't smelled since the days of the enchanted broccoli forest. Rich, I smelled it often at Stanford, but I smelled it in my lobby, which was pot. And, Stanford students have a lot more wider margins to experiment with drugs than black kids in inner city communities. And I immediately thought to myself, I got to lean in more. And I took them to the movies, and I took them out to diners. I asked them what their dreams were, and they were really humble dreams. I still remember when one of them told me they wanted to learn how to repair cars and maybe one day have a shop. And I thought, okay, I'm going to fix you guys up with mentors that can help you with all of your dreams, and made commitments to them that I didn't immediately follow through on because I was too busy. I was running to become mayor of the city of Newark. And even though I was busy and didn't follow through, they would still greet me in the lobby on the end of long campaigning days and cheer me on, lift me up. And then I get elected, and I have death threats against me. So they surround me with police officers, station cops in the lobby of the building, and the project, safest projects I think I'd been in a long time. But the kids, I don't care who you are, high school kids don't want to hang out where the police are. So I just didn't see these young people. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm on a mission to help all the children of the city. I know I'll reconnect with them soon. And then a month into my time in office, I'm called to Court Street in Newark. And I get there after a shooting, and there's a body covered up. And I barely affirm the death on the sidewalk. And I'm too busy ministering to the living and telling them what we're going to do to drive crime down. And I get home that night, and I'm going through my BlackBerry, reading reports. And the name of the murderer was Hassan, the young man from my lobby. And I will never tell you, talk about shattered. God literally put my dad in front of me. My dad used to talk about the conspiracy of love, all the small acts of kindness that helped him get from a rural, poor boy, black boy in the 1930s and 40s to become an IBM executive. All the acts of kindness, people going out of their way. And here I had a chance to pay it forward. And I'll never forget going to his funeral, which was like in the Perry's funeral home in Newark. And it was like descending into the hull of a ship. We were all tied together in grief, wailing and moaning, chained to this horrific daily occurrence in America, which is another young boy in a box. And it haunts me to this day, and I regret it to this day that I didn't do more. And so I don't know what it will take for all of us to understand that we are so connected, that what you do matters, that no matter how busy you are, there's something more you can do to end this death, the pain, the hurt, the devastation that happens when a young man commits suicide, or a woman gets killed by her boyfriend, or a gun, a legal weapon, because there was not a background check, gets into the streets of communities like mine and is used for a horrific murder. And so my appeal to folks here is that democracy is not a spectator sport. It really isn't. You get the government you deserve. And people before us sacrificed, sweat, bled, were willing to die to try to bend the arc of this nation's moral truth. And if there's ever a time to lean in more, to change something that's not partisan, it's right now. Because you and I worry, even though I think we're going to pass some legislation, I worry that you may call me up and say, hey, can we have another 15 minutes to have a conversation about why do we have another mass shooting? And this time, God forbid, if you're a listener here, God forbid it's your neighborhood, your school, your mosque, your supermarket, your neighborhood. And you're wondering why I didn't do more to stop that pain and that horror from visiting upon your life.
Wow.
That's amazing. Amazing words, Senator. Thank you so much for telling us that and sharing that. It's like, it must weigh heavy every day, these kinds of things that you've witnessed and then also hear about. You must get every day and another tragic story like that. Kind of, how do you deal with that on a daily basis? Like the responsibility you carry and the weight of all of that.
Look, I am who I am because a community that I'm not from embraced me, a young law student from Yale who thought I was some kind of savior and knocked me on my ass. People like Frank Hutchins and Miss Virginia Jones, Miss Yancey, Miss Wright. I can tell you the women who taught me. I say I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD on the streets of Newark. And I have too many stories about gun violence, but on the worst moment for me, because it was just so traumatizing, we hear these stories about the shootings, but we're not seeing the bodies. Well, I was on a scene of a shooting where a teenager got shot multiple times, and I was the person trying to stop them from bleeding to death. And it was the most gruesome thing I had ever experienced. His foamy blood was coming from his mouth, blood pouring from his chest. And I just was doing, I think about it now, no training. So I'm sticking my hand in his mouth, thinking if I just can clear away the passage for him to breathe because he was choking on his blood. And I remember that night trying to scrub this boy's blood off of my hands. And I remember I have never felt more anger at my country than I did then. And I never felt more of wanting to quit and just be done with this. Why was I even trying when the problem seemed so much bigger than me? And I came down into that lobby where the boys hang out the next morning and walked through the lobby. It was early in the morning, so nobody was there. And I walk into the courtyard. And, this is why I believe in a larger power, because I was drowning. I was done. It was over. And then I see the Tenant President, this elderly woman, Miss Virginia Jones, who had her son murdered in the lobby in which I lived years before I moved in. A woman had every reason to move out of those projects. In fact, I know the money she made. I know where she worked. She didn't have to live in this dangerous neighborhood, especially after her son was killed. And I remember walking out and being frozen because I saw her back to me. And then she turns around, almost like she could hear my hurt. And then she sees me and she does the only thing that I needed at that moment, not to say a word. She just opened her arms, and I ran across that courtyard like a little boy running to his mom. And I'm much bigger than she is, but I felt like I disappeared in her arms, and she held me. And this is the gift she gave me as I started sobbing. She just said two words over and over that I hold on to now when I hurt, and when I get angry, and when I don't understand my country, and where I want to give up. And I think about women like that who never give up. I think about kids from Parkland who turn their pain into purpose. I think of Moms Demand Action, people who've lost and turned their hurt into action. And this woman just rubs my back and she says two words that I held on to during my time as mayor and in my toughest days here. And she just says to me, she's rubbing my back, she says, "Stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful." And so I believe that what real hope is about is like Miss Jones. It's like hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word, that no matter how much it visits upon you, you still have agency, you still have power, even if it's just the defiance of keeping going and not giving up. And so, yeah, I see shrines on my streets, teddy bears and candles too many damn times. And it's unfortunately Black children or Latino children who don't seem to count as much sometimes to the media. They don't seem to get the same coverage. And I get angry about systems that could date back to, when we had overt redlining. They've created a lot of the pain and hurt. But I will tell you this, we've come this far by faith, and I have no right to give up, especially when others didn't. And the real challenge I see, again, is how do we make other people care? I don't need to change one person's mind who might believe that we shouldn't pass universal background checks or gun licensing, or I don't have to change one person's mind. all we have to do is get the people who share our beliefs, which is the majority of us, to do a lot more, to show their faith, because as my religious tradition says, and it's a terrible foreboding thing to say, but it says faith without works is dead.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Wow. I'm just trying to process everything that you just shared. It's such a powerful story. And I think if you can carry that resonance of hope and channel that into action, it's inspiring for the rest of us who might feel paralyzed or powerless, or as if, our actions don't really matter, because they do. And in this democratic republic that we're privileged to live in, it's incumbent upon all of us to shoulder that responsibility and do what we can to put in motion the better world that we want for ourselves and future generations.
And a lot of, you have a lot of athletes that listen to this, and it's just very obvious. Like, nothing worthwhile is easy. Nothing that I watched you do. You don't just get up in the morning and win a national championship or win a heavyweight boxing match. It is hard. It takes endurance and resilience and pushing through pain and pushing through a setback. But that's what it takes to be great. And I do believe in the greatness of this country. I think American history is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. But we who are the inheritors of this impossible dream that is America have got to, as I failed to do in that one instance with my dad, we've got to prove worthy of it by paying it forward through our sacrifice and our struggle.
You mentioned, just if I could trouble you with just one last recommendation, because you've been so generous with your time, but it's you mentioned that you're asking us to give more and do more. And I see like a lot of the volume on the political discussion has gone up. The frequency that the average person is talking about politics has gone way up. And a lot of that you poignantly pointed out is related to our phones and obviously that addiction. But often what we're doing is just shouting into the void. There's not really much getting accomplished other than a bunch of information soup, which doesn't help us. Actually, it hurts us. What would you say would be you've mentioned some great organizations. What kind of, if there's a couple concrete steps that you could recommend for listeners to kind of get involved, or a first step to getting more active?
Yeah, I would find others and connect with others that are doing that. I mean, this is the great thing about America now and these devices, I have to say, because I don't want to say there's only negative to them, is that fingertips away are the ability to connect with people that are probably 2 or 3 steps ahead of you, sometimes 10 or a mile ahead of you, and understanding what makes a difference, makes a change. And so do some research, find these organizations, find these people who are committed to this kind of change. And never underestimate that you can make a difference. I've seen incredibly imaginative young people find ways to bring pressure to bear amongst people in power. It's really extraordinary. And this will be it, because my staff always stands up and when you gotta go. But I am a physical, I am the living evidence that you doing a little bit of something can change the world. And I always say this because there was this white guy sitting on a couch in Jersey in 1965, watching TV and just chilling out. I think it was a Sunday. And this was back when we only had 3 channels. And they break away. The movie most Americans were watching that night was a movie called Judgment at Nuremberg. And suddenly he sees these people on a bridge called the Edmund Pettus Bridge being viciously beaten. And he is so disturbed by it. He's like, I got to go to Alabama. And then he laughs at himself because he just started a business. He can't afford a ticket even to Alabama. So this guy does what is a great American tradition. He just thinks to himself, okay, I'm just going to do the best I can with what I have where I am. And he does a calculus in his mind. And he thinks to himself, okay, I could spare 1 hour a week of pro bono work. And he does what I just advised you to do. He calls around. Back then he didn't have an internet. Calls around to figure out who might need a 1 hour pro bono civil rights legal work. And he finds this young woman. She's now 93 years old, but and she's still head of the same organization. Finds this woman who's head of the Fair Housing Council in northern New Jersey. And she's like, hallelujah, Jesus, I need help because we don't know how to stop. They won't let Black people live in these neighborhoods. They keep showing up and they get steered away. And he goes, well, let's figure something out. And they design this sting operation where they get volunteer white couples to volunteer to follow Black couples around. And so what happens is he goes, 4 years later, I get this case file of this a black family moving up from the South, getting turned away from house after house. He goes, we set up the sting. They fall in love with this house. They're told it's already sold. They leave. The white couple comes. The house is for sale. They put a bid on the house. Papers are drawn up. On the day of the closing, the white couple doesn't show up. The lawyer does, and the black guy. And they confront the real estate agent. Real estate agent doesn't give up. He gets up and punches the lawyer in the face, saves a Doberman pincher on the black guy, all this kind of rigmarole. And next thing you know, that black family moves into this affluent, all-white town, as the father would say, that we are the 4 raisins in a tub of sweet vanilla ice cream. That family is my family. Crazy. That's my story. Wow. That's how I got to where I grew up. And by 18 years old, I was a 2-position high school All-American on my way to Stanford University on a full scholarship. And I would not be in this Senate office right now if it wasn't for some white guy years before I was born deciding to give 1 hour a week of pro bono work. So don't tell me that your actions right now, if you're listening to this, can't make a difference. What you do, if it's righteous and for a cause of justice and peace and security, or the highest of human virtues, love, it resonates, it reverberates, it goes out across space and time and makes a difference. You may not live to see it or even have the gift of knowing it, but it makes a difference. And now more than ever, we need that kind of radical love and consistency to say, I'm going to give a little bit every day or every week or whatever you can do for the cause of my country.
Fantastic. Wow. I'm inspired. Adam, what are we going to do? We got to do more than we're doing.
I got to do at least 1 hour a week. I mean, this is crazy. That's an unbelievable story.
Yeah,
thank you
incredible.
so much, you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Booker. Really appreciate it. Have a great evening and look forward to crossing paths again.
I hope to see you in LA.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm holding you to it.
I'm trust me, man. We got a lot of. So we need to talk about America's broken food system and how Washington, D.C. has created a system where 98%, where only 2% of our ag subsidies go to the thing we tell people to eat the most of. So I'm looking forward to that.
100%.
And my staff is all here. They're all waving.
Saying, oh, there we go. Thanks. Hey everybody! Thanks for letting the senator run long. I thought we were just getting 15 minutes. We got 40, almost 50 minutes. So you've been very generous. Thank you,
everybody. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, you guys.